Hi, welcome back to another video. This is going to be the second part of my PDF to text to data series. We want to talk very briefly about this Maryanne's invoice that we received that is in a PDF format. In the last video we showed how to get this into textual form so that we can break it down very easily and get the information into fields that we need, create some useful rows, put them into a table somewhere, and then go on with our reporting from there. So today we want to talk about simple macros and how macros can help you do things much more easily as you develop an extended array of workflows within Alteryx. An old adage from many years ago that team of developers that I worked with, we discussed how a good developer tends to be a lazy developer. And most developers can understand that and go along with it. We have some people that say that, well, they're not really lazy, they're smart. Either way, developers really don't like to do repetitive work. So when I look at this data set, I realize that there's some common elements through this data set and other kinds of data sets that will be coming in a textual format. And this includes whether you get them as a tab delimited or some other type of textual export. It will start in Alteryx as text data, and you need to manipulate it into the proper field types so that you can do better reporting, as well as to store it into a functional data warehouse. So looking in here, you see that I have this very nice date, which appears in lots of pieces of information that you might get. People like to output date in a very readable textual format. But this is not a date field that I can use any action from, so I need to convert it into a date field. Also in here I have another very common date format, which is month, day, year, with slashes separating it. Brings me with a little bit more of a thrill because there are no leading zeros in here, and when I convert this into a date within Alteryx, I will need to get those zeros in there. But again, it's something that I'll do quite regularly through all of the data extracts that I might be processing. And finally, we need to deal with what's considered pretty dates or other formats of dates. In this case, what I have here is negative numbers in parentheses. I'll need to convert that into more of a date field. Also in some consideration is what happens if they put commas in there, like numeric fields. They put commas in those numeric fields, and I can convert it into a number to be utilized. Those commas will get in my way as well, so I need to pull them out from the textual format. So there's a couple things I need to do to a number to get it into a numeric field. And when looking at this, then I say if I can simply repeat that calculation over and over again, making sure I don't make any mistakes each time. Or I can do a cut and paste a whole lot of remembering what workflows I happen to have it stored in. That works as well, but it leads me to seek and destroy kind of operations, as well as potentially creating errors in it as well when I do the replication. Which brings me to macros. Macros do not have to be extensive. They don't have to be complex. They can simply do one piece of work. And in this case, let's look at converting a string to a number. If you look at the data coming out here, you can see I have these textual fields that have numeric values in them. Let's get them into a actual numeric field. So I created a very simple little macro. And this style of macro I can repeat pretty easily over and over again. And in essence, we'll take a look at this from step-by-step basis. So to begin with, I have input. This widget can be found in the interface. We can see macro input right there. What I need to do is to define a blueprint for that data so that I can actually then use that information in calculating or creating the rest of the workflow. In this case, I simply want to use text input as my sample, and then it will work on any data coming in. So what I do is I create a field called inString within my text input, and I give it actually one of the more complicated versions, which is both a comma and parentheses for negative. And that gives me something to work with going through. I then build the workflow based on that data, putting a select in here to make sure the string has a large size. Converting this data from text in a general format means removing any of the commas that are in there with the replace char, removing the closed parentheses, and then actually replacing any open parentheses with a negative sign. Trim the data completely so there's no extra blanks sitting at the beginning or the end of that field, and then turning it into a number and returning it as a float. Pretty simple. Build this a step at a time. You could always build this as multiple different formulas going through till you get to the final formula. Your choice. I tended to just go ahead and continue to build this starting from the inside and working my way out. That allows me to see in the data preview the values as it's going through each piece of conversion to make sure I was spot on. That being said, once it comes out, go into my select at the end. This select here really doesn't change anything, but this select sets me up for this action. This action comes off of the input. Alteryx remembers the names of the fields that are being processed through here. So an action that I can take against a select widget is to update the select with reverse field map. Very confusing, but what this does is on the way out, it goes ahead and gives it back its original name coming in. If we want to test this very quickly, we will go ahead and create a new workflow, bring my input as text input, call this my number, give it value 1, 2, 3, 4 just to be very quick about it. Right click, insert, macros already opened up here, so it'll be inside of the macros down here at the very bottom, convert string to number. Connect it up here, put a browse on the end of it so we can see what it looks like coming out. And now I need to attach it. It wants to know what the end string is. I give it the field my number. And again, this macro will then run for any record just to show you how that works. Let's call this 1.234. Give it a value. You can see it'll run on 2 values then. Pretty simple to test. We run it. It works. I click on the output and you see that I came in with a 1, 2, 3, 4. It still has the name my number. This little piece of work here goes ahead then and replaces the in string to actually what was passed into it. You cannot change the name of the output. You can make it a more complex macro to actually change the name of the output value, but it makes sense just to do that in a select if you have to. Back to my test. Click on metadata. You see that we have my number and out number being a float. So what I would do here when I would actually use this in a real workflow is just go ahead and drop a select in here, set it to whatever I want it to be, and give it some other name. If I don't want it to be float, I could make it something else such as a double. Again, running it through, it now has a better name. Take a look at the data. This is a pretty easy template to use to build additional macros. Simple one is the convert string. You see that it has the same exact steps in here, and instead my formula in the middle is I take the in text, parse it as character month, day, comma, and year. So this will only work within this one specific format. You might want to try to make this more sophisticated. I would rather just have a series of different conversion macros sitting out there in my library that I can just plug in when I need them to. Since this is taking a text input, We can actually run this to see how it works. This will take the text input that I created and generate some output for me. And you can see that November 8th, 1955 becomes 1955-11-08. So this will work, and I can just then plug it in the same way in any testing that I do. Again, the same template. Input data, update the name going out, formula in the middle, everything works. Something a little more sophisticated then is, because now we want to go ahead and convert this a little bit more difficult string, which is the month, day, year, that doesn't have necessarily zeros associated with it that need to be there. So it makes it sort of a variable format. That also is not too difficult. So if I take a look at my edit data from my input, single digit day, single digit month, and 4-digit year. Set it also to compensate a few other things. So what I want to do here is take this data, pass it into an XML or a RegEx configuration. I take my input string. What I need to do is show what the output string is going to, how it's going to be parsed. Those values that come inside of the parentheses will become values. So here I have a 1 or 2-digit value. It'll take that first 1 or 2-digit value and call it date month. The second one sits here, and the third one is 2 or 4. That's for the year. I decided to let this thing handle if you only give me a 2-digit year as opposed to the 4-digit year. In between are slashes. This will say that it'll look at this format. It'll take a 1 or 2-digit number that is terminated by a slash, another 1 or 2-digit number that is terminated by a slash, and then a 2 or 4-digit number coming at the end. Convert these into day, month, and year. As you can see, they came out as text strings. I left them as text strings rather than turning them to number because that makes my formula a bit easier. I decided to do this in multiple steps just to show you how you can do it that way. Simply said, if the month has a length of 1, put a 0 on the beginning of it. This takes a 0 and concatenates it with its value. The 8 becomes a 08. I do the same calculation with day. That says if the length of the day string is 1, then insert a 0 at the beginning of it. If the year is equal to 2 digits, I use a 20 to make it 20. So example, the 21 would become 2021. And then finally, to actually get my date, this is my date field coming out. I take the date year, concatenate it with a minus, concatenate it with the date month, concatenate it with a minus, concatenate it with the date day. And then you can see that the output, I had a number of different test cases in here to make sure they all worked. And you can see that it successfully made a date within my test stream here. So then again, all that I need to do in my workflow, we want to go ahead and do this. Let's delete this first row.
Power off.
We have that same test date that we used before. Rather than this macro, we'll want to insert our macro, which is our convert day, month, year to date. Connect it up in the output, connect it up here. Which field do we want to use? We want to use my number, which is really not my number, not the best test case, but we run it and you can see it takes my character, month, day, year, and turns it actually into a date. Clicking on metadata, you see that is what occurred. So now when I get ready to begin my further processing of Maryanne's information, So for example, my header information in here is pretty straightforward. If I turn this on, you see that what I'll need to do is, this is the whatever number of header records are in there. I take the first row. I'll want tag number 3 to go into my macro, which is tag 3 became my invoice date, and then the output then becomes my invoice date as a date field as opposed to a variable string. Very simply, when it runs through, then it will go ahead and convert that value for me, giving me information to do it here. Move this back up again. Take a look at what's in invoice total. So here again, what we have is that total record at the very end of the invoice. I only want to choose one record just in case there are multiple pages in this invoice. Tag 2 is my invoice total text. Run it through my convert string to number. Quick run here, you can see the output looks like. So it takes that number and returns a number just in case it was a negative something else. I'll be using that later for billing details. But what we'll need to work on here is a bit more work to do. Keep these turned on for my next video. And we'll begin to work on our billing detail, which has to do with consolidating that bit more complex piece of Maryanne's invoice, which is where I have a header record with detail records associated with it. And so we will want to process these records as well, which is the subject of the next video. So hopefully you feel a bit more confident about making macros to do work for you. Makes your development easier as you slowly build up that library of macros. It's also nice if someone says, how did you calculate that date? I said, well, I have a macro for that. Let me send you a macro and you can use it yourself. Much easier than trying to share code. Stay tuned for the next version of this, where I will separate out the header and details to get us the actual transactions in here so I can begin to have data to utilize for my billing information. Subscribe to my channel. You'll be notified when the next video is released, as well as drop me any comments you have about this, what you'd like to see, some more information that you would need to have to feel more confident with macros.